by Creative Ireland, supported by Creative Ireland, and thank you to Tanya Bonotti for coming along this evening too. And it has been great working with the Gallery of Photography, with Tanya and with Trish and Dara and the team, and of course it's a privilege to have worked with and met with Alan, and also Cronon O'Dublin from UCC. So and Pesya as well, and congratulations first of all on such a wonderful publication. I've read it twice. I've been absolutely stuck into it, as you can see from it bristling with post-its here. So it's a privilege to interview you, Alan, because you're such a renowned photographer, and you obviously were born in Dublin, but you made your career in the United States and travelled extensively. And I suppose your work spans a number of different genres, portraits, fashion, travel, and then you have your own creative, artistic projects. So I think everybody would be very interested to hear a little bit about the genesis of your career as a photographer. Obviously you were born in Dublin in 1939, and you mentioned that you got your first camera in 1952. And if we could just start maybe with that little background, and then we move on to specifically to the book.
Okay, well, good evening everyone. I began as a schoolboy. We took a photograph, my friend and I, Christopher Barry, with flash powder on a plate for the headmaster coming into class, and we had the little fuse. We lit the fuse and it went off. So that was the beginning. I was 13, yes. I think, about that time. Then I joined this Photographic Society of Ireland and entered competitions, and we were like the renegades for the other members of that august group. They were most interested in photographing swans or ropes around boats, that they make nice little patterns. Anyway, I went on from that, and I worked in the Irish Times as the I guess locally called T-boy, and then I was made a photographer when I was 16, and I thought this was going to be venturing into interesting things, murders and robberies and things like that, but it was mostly photographing the Bank of Ireland annual general meeting or Rotary Club. And so my interest waned fairly quickly, and I left that and worked from my home and bedroom and worked for a magazine called Creation. I think it was Creation. Okay. And then I did portrait assignments and photographed some poets, John Montague, and then I met an editor from Vogue in London who said, I'll get you a job in Vogue if you photograph someone famous. So Orson Welles was in Dublin, and I phoned up the Gaiety Theatre, and I made an arrangement to photograph him that evening in his costume. We had an exchange, it was nice, and then I brought the prints next day quickly, made contact prints of everything, and he, being a natural-born megalomaniac, ordered many of them and plastered these prints all over his dressing room and assigned me. And then I left that, but from that I photographed many other people in the theatre. Rosaline Lenihan, James McKenna's The Scatterin, that was sort of like a West Side Story of Ireland, that was done in, I don't know what year it would be, I can't even remember, 1958 maybe, or 59. And then Glory Be and other things, musicals and other productions by John Ryan, who was I think the owner of the Bailey bar. But all of these, and all of these people that I photographed individually would come to my flat, or the studio I had in a basement on Fitzwilliam Square, and parties would take place. They would go on till 2, 3, 4, 5 in the morning. And of course this is exciting, but it wasn't advancing my photographic ambitions. So, okay. And I went on into writing to Richard Avedon in New York, who I most admired. And I did go to London for this job that I was supposed to be given with the picture of Orson Welles, but they had no interest in that whatsoever, or in my photography. And so I determined I would go to the person I admired the most and think it's better to start where at the top rather than in the middle. Yeah. And so he wrote back to me that the possibility interested him to work in a studio, but my photography did not. So this was music to my ears, and that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to shed everything I had, and so I went to New York in 1961 to 62, and then I returned in 62 with a plan to photograph the people who ran the Catholic Church. And I thought this would be an interesting project to the men and women who ran the church in Ireland. Ireland at that time was still full of, it was run by the church. So that was too difficult a project to undertake. I couldn't write all the letters that were necessary to get permission. I did do some. And then I decided that photography has a different quality. I was taking photographs with a square camera, a Rolleiflex or a Hasselblad, and you're controlling the situation. A person is in a room or in a place, and you control how the picture is to be. You're the director, so you can't do anything beyond what your own capability or imagination can do with the cooperation of the person. And essentially, in doing a photograph of a person, you actually have to transfer the photograph to the person. The subject actually takes their own photograph, depending on how your relationship with the subject develops. And you don't have very much time, maybe an hour or 2 hours with somebody, and hopefully it becomes like a kind of quick psychoanalysis where your anxieties have to compare with their anxieties, and you muddle through, and you can break and have a cup of tea, or you can change the thing, you change the situation. But somehow, without telling them what to do, you want them to do things that you cannot describe. That intimacy is something that cannot be explained, really, but that is essentially what portrait photography is about. I thought there were limitations to portrait photography, and there should be more interesting photography was being done by one particular photographer named Robert Frank in the United States. And his work was much more involved. It was not an object or a person being photographed, it was a person in relationship to something else, or two things, or three things, all interdependent. And no area of the picture is wasted. Everything has to be active and moving to make the complete a picture. Sort of like a very well-written sentence or a poem. So with that position, I thought I should try to take pictures in the street. And so I put the other camera aside, and I bought a 35mm Leica, and I went out into the streets in Dublin, having first tried to do street photography with the square camera, but that was too clumsy and too slow to work. And so that began a sort of an odyssey for the next 2 years of walking around Dublin, learning how to see, learning how to take a photograph, learning what does a photograph mean. And so the only guidance is really an instinct and maybe a little, you have some art history knowledge that helps, painting, knowledge of paintings helps, but it has to depart from that and become alive unto itself. And there's no dictum as to how do you get there. I would say if I got one photograph a week, I would be lucky, but mostly it's failure. The occasional photograph rises to the surface. And when you look at the contact prints after editing, the picture that is any good somehow comes to the surface, or you make a few little rough prints and then one of them stands out, and then you reconsider. And the editing is as important as the taking of the picture. But everybody can take one picture, but to continue to take picture, to make pictures that have an interdependency on each other, that's what's difficult, or that's what you can't predict. So you fumble along, and that's what I did. And then I went back to the United States because I couldn't support myself walking around taking photographs that I wanted to take. and I didn't see anybody else who was going to support me. So I tried to get funding from the Arts Council that funds the Gallery of Photography, but they obviously beat me to it. But this is back in 1963. So I returned to New York in '64, and I began a kind of commercial career. But unless you're actually committed to something, you don't get anywhere. You actually have to, and I didn't really I looked at commercial photography with disdain, particularly advertising, and so I did mostly editorial photography, which is not so corrupt. It's a little purer, but not that much. And I balanced funding projects of my own, so I'd come back to Ireland to do a project after I got some support from a magazine on another basis, like photographing a knitting book for Vogue magazine, and then that would fund my photographing travellers or tape recording the travellers, and that became my centrally interesting project, because the travellers were like outsider artists. They were like outside the norm. They kind of let me in, and I tape recorded them at night, and I photographed during the day. And I loved that life, and I actually really miss it. But of course I had to make a living, so back I went to the United States. The United States is photography is a perfect art form for America or for the United States, because the crime and the punishment are closer together. You know, you take a photograph, you can see the result very quickly. It's different for a writer. They have to suffer a lot, but we have to suffer a lot too. We're dependent on the weather. They're dependent on being left alone. And photography is a social activity too. You can take pictures of your friends, or you can take pictures of yourself. That becomes another area, but I won't go into that.
Yeah. So,
but perhaps you have a lot more questions you want me to answer.
So no, I mean, this is fascinating. So you obviously returned to the United States, and you were very successful there. I mean, your work was in Vogue, was in the New York Times. Your work is in the collection of MoMA and the Institute of Art in Chicago. And you also photographed some really significant people. I mean, for instance, the artist Willem de Kooning. I just think that photo that you took of de Kooning is an absolutely superb shot, because and it's worth looking it up if you're not familiar with it, because de Kooning, of course, was a towering figure, but in it he almost looks childlike. So what was it like? And also you photographed Tom Waits, the singer. What was it like photographing people like de Kooning?
Well, everybody is different. It doesn't really matter. You're kind of all in the same soup together. And you just have to kind of get through it. I mean, he said the most significant thing that he said is that art is never produced from a position of comfort. Okay. And at that time, he was very comfortable.
Yes.
He had a huge studio. But he knew the other side of it, and it's a struggle.
Yes.
And anybody who's involved in art at all, it's work. It's mostly work, but it is also a struggle against, it's not any easier the next day than it was the previous day. And so it's a kind of full-time job.
Yes. And my sense as well is that you are very much, I mean, as an artist, you're very interested in music, you're interested in literature, and for instance, the Traveller series, that was prompted by your interest in Yeats's poetry. That was, so by chance, I suppose, you decided you ended up devoting an entire project to.
Yes, well, I did sort of sidetrack myself, because I found the Travellers and the Travellers' lives so fascinating. People who didn't have anything. They didn't have nobody could read or write. But everybody had a vitality that was unmatched for being able to face each day without not knowing anything about how they would survive. And so that was somehow related to me in a way that I kind of accepted, and that they were open enough to let me in, and I benefited by photographing them. But it was also the time that they were being driven off the sides of the road and having to camp in places. and
Cherry Orchard.
settled down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
But that was a time of just good fortune on my part to turn up at that moment.
But I mean, obviously there was a strong degree of trust, in you.
Well, we became. They were like my grown-up family. I protected them, and they protected me in a way.
Yes, and it's a very significant body of work because not only did you photograph them, you also recorded their songs and conversations and tales, and that archive is in UCD. It's a very significant archive.
Yes, right.
Yeah. So just in terms of the genesis of this publication, and this is a selection obviously of the images in it. I mean, it is a wonderful publication, and I suppose it's interesting that you have such a strong tie to Dublin, the city of your birth, where you spent your formative years, even though your career has been in the United States. I mean, there's 113 photos in this, and each one just is so, they tell such fascinating stories. But obviously then Pesya decided to post them it's only just over a year ago. I was thinking that the first photograph, and here we are sitting just over a year later with the completed book. But the commentary, I mean, Pesya, would you like to explain how that came about?
Yeah, and it's in August 2020. We lived in Sag Harbor, and the high school from New York asked me to teach. And the subject was memory. We started with short-term memory, and I showed them one of the traveler photos that my high school students. Mm-hmm. They looked, I took the photo off the screen, and I asked everything on Zoom, of course. I asked, what do you remember? And why do you remember those things? And then I said to my student, I have here some photos of Dublin in 1963. I will post them on Facebook and see what people remember, and I will report back to you. You see? So I took one photo, this photo of the man with a cigar and the cigarette and the bicycle, and I posted it. And in moments, people started writing about the photo and commenting and trying to figure out what's the location. And I said, wow, that's so authentic. I've never been in Dublin before. I'm learning now about this city. The comments are so wonderful. That can be a book. Mm-hmm. And every day I posted another photo and another photo. And at the end I posted 2 or 3 because I wanted to see what they are writing. Mm-hmm. And we have some of the writers here in the crowd.
Okay. Yes. Oh, very good.
Yeah, and it was just an amazing experience.
Yeah.
After a year, we have a book.
Yeah, no, it is amazing, and the photos are superb, but the text, it's like listening to people having a conversation. The way the sequence that has been used in the design. And it's absolutely fascinating. I mean, the nicknames for Dublin people and the various locations and people and all the tangents that people have gone off. I mean, has it surprised you, Alan? Yeah. The way people have gone about identifying the locations, etc.
Yes. Right. Well, but so many things. There's a musician lying asleep, and his guitar case and his shoes beside him, and the comments about those shoes wouldn't be there today if they were lying down. Then, what's he doing lying asleep? It's only 1 o'clock in the afternoon because somebody noticed the time on his wristwatch.
Yes.
And he's probably pawned the guitar out of he's just got the guitar case. But it just kept tumbling and spinning. Every comment got a contradiction or an addition.
Yeah.
And it's hard to describe one over another, but they're very, very amusing, and they're not the work of university professors or art critics. They are actually the soul of the city in responding to an image, that lifted the photograph up, and the photograph helped So they became on a seesaw of one to the other. So
Yeah.
when people start looking at the book, they start reading, and then they won't give up reading.
Yes. Yeah.
Forget about the photograph. They just go on reading.
Well,
So it's a kind of an exciting venture to see
yeah.
what writers would like to do, but one person could never have written this.
No.
It's impossible. It was the work of the city.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, and the sense of community as well. And I suppose what struck me is when we're in an age of people scrolling constantly and glancing at images, these images have been absolutely dissected and analysed. And I mean, even there was one where the brickwork in the street, there was a dispute over, you know, where the location was. No, that brickwork isn't there in that area.
Right.
Until people got to the actual place. And even, for instance, the photo of the grotto, that was just intriguing because about the mention of the brother who used to go and pray there every day in people's recollections. And I was thinking, these people are, I mean, they're people probably in their late 60s now, and just the vividness of the names and who fed the person the brother who used to come and pray at the grotto, and just even the detail of the cardboard box with that used to hold toilet rolls, and the sense of I mean, it was amazing to read those comments.
There was supposed to be a headless horseman used to ride through that area. That's why the grotto got built.
Okay.
Yes. So it's a kind of protective act that the locals did.
Yeah.
And the cardboard box might be the pandemic that we all are with, that we're all in.
Yes.
Stuck in a cardboard box, waiting.
Exactly.
Or running.
Yeah.
Toilet paper.
Yeah.
And toilet paper, what we couldn't ever get.
Exactly. The recurring theme of the pandemic. And, you know, were there particular, when you were photographing in 1963, were there particular areas of the city that you
I did,
went
like,
to?
I loved Ringsend, an Irish town, along the Dodder, which I used to think was the canal, actually. I thought it was the canal going into the Liffey, but it was actually the Dodder.
Yeah.
But I liked that area because I liked because it just seemed emblematic of the rest of the city. It was grey, it was empty. There weren't other photographers at that time going around.
Yeah.
And it just, some of the scenes, there's a picture of a little boy raising his arms up, and his mother or grandmother walking with him, and then two men behind talking about a motorcycle, or beside a motorcycle, and a little bit of the river. And that just seemed, that is it. That was Dublin then to me.
Yes, yeah.
I, of course, probably identified with the child trying to get out.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose like that you do have a sense of the poverty of Dublin at the time, and that comes through. What also intrigued me was the number of people who could identify every single car in all the photos too, and you know, able to give the year. For instance, this one here, this is a brand new Peugeot from 1963.
Right.
And I mean, can you talk a little bit about that photo?
Well, and they're talking about the donkey jacket that one person's wearing, and there's, you know, somebody had that car that he could take his bird out with instead of the bicycle and wouldn't have to walk home. And, you know, the whole, it covers a lot of ground.
It does.
Each comment.
Yes.
About where it is.
Yes.
This pair that look like Gabriel Byrne and but it isn't Gabriel Byrne. It's somebody else. They're actors. No, they're not actors. They're wearing wigs. And she's pouring salt on the table instead of on the chips. Yeah,
and even the Dublin wit with that comment, because somebody said, "Oh, it looks like Eamon Ryan," and then there was, no, he wouldn't. He'd be asleep if he was in it, and he'd be eating vegetables. So it's really current kind of commentary. But that struck me, like the wit and the Dublin expressions. That, like for instance, even the expression "hot in their leather." One of them says he's hot in his leather, and I was actually looking up this morning trying to find out what the origin. I've heard people say it, but what the origin of it is. So it's just so Dublin, and it's just. I mean, it is just a wonderful, I suppose, treasure trove. I mean, in terms of like as a commentary of Ireland as it was and how that has vanished. I mean, you mentioned about the control of the church, and there's a lot of commentary throughout the book about the role of the church.
Right.
Would you like to talk a little bit more on those photos?
I don't know, because I felt I was aware of it. I remember we were always aware that John Charles McQuaid controlled Ireland with an iron fist. He might as well have been a king. And he would be driven into his palace with 6 other men in black every morning, and in their Citroën car into Drumcondra to his palace. But I know that the church was a big impediment to life, and well, everybody knows it.
Yes.
I don't know how. It's not what I could add is not worth really saying much about, except I was glad to leave it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that was the noticeable thing about the commentary, that there's a lot of
Anger,
and there's a lot of a sense that people have the freedom now to say what they could never have said over 60 years ago.
That's true.
And there is that kind of train
refreshments.
through it.
There aren't enough glasses there.
Would you like a glass of water there? It is water, isn't it? Yeah, so I suppose, I mean, the other thing that I noticed as well, I suppose, is the whole kind of the idea of we're so obsessed with recycling and everything now, and you realise that seems to be another kind of theme throughout, some of the signage, the photographs of the signage that you captured are fantastic images, and again, they're gone now, and people's recollections of signage in the city. Yeah. And people saying, what particular shops did in terms of mending trousers, the seat of the trousers.
Or turning the seats, because they get shiny from people cycling to work.
Yeah,
right.
So it is. And at the time when you took these photographs in 1963, you went back to New York, and did you exhibit them or show them to?
Well, they were exhibited, but not for a long time.
Okay.
I mean, I developed them and printed them in Dublin, and then, or some of them, but, I only thought, as I said, most of the photographs I would say are okay. There are some good, but a lot of them I thought were, they're okay. But there are things that I wouldn't necessarily like about a lot of them. So, I had an exhibit in New York in '79, I think. Maybe it was earlier, somewhere around then, and some of these were in that show.
Okay.
But they were mostly the travellers ellipsed these photographs, so they got left as earlier things.
Yes. Yeah.
I became more capable as I got a little older, but I like the flavour of these as being. I like the way that we got them organised for this book.
Yes, yeah.
And that's, and I like the words. I like the way it was designed. So it's not always that you can, as a photographer, that you can actually control everything, from the taking of the photographs to the printing, to the designer, to the book. And there's always something that goes wrong. Yeah. Like the barcodes were left off the book. That happened before, but these things happen. Books, always something goes wrong. Yeah. But we were lucky that a lot of things went through well.
Yes.
I mean, it's awkward to handle the book in your hands, because there are these fold-out pages that are effective, but they are a bit troublesome.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the titles of the photographs, did you assign those yourself?
Yeah, we just made them up as they were being posted, as Pesya was posting them. I said, what's that? It's the shoemaker, or it's the blind woman.
Yes.
Well, the woman wasn't blind. They wrote back that that's my aunt and my nephew.
Yes.
in the photograph. Maybe the photographer's blind. So there's a lot of back and forth
for the
with
card.
things.
Yeah.
It looked like she was blind because her eyes are wide open, and there's the little boy beside her. It
Yeah.
has what looks like a white stick.
Yes.
So they said, well, maybe the boy's blind and not her. Anyway. So,
In the beginning, we posted the photo with a title and a question. And we felt like the question actually direct people and they answer to the question. And it's not as interesting as just putting the photo in front of them and then they make comments about anything. Yeah.
Yeah. And were there some instances where people were identified and maybe they didn't want to be?
Exactly.
Yeah, because there's, the images that fold out are very strong. For instance, the very striking one of the man, the close-up.
the almost perfect
The
man.
almost perfect man. It's in the book. I mean, that's. Could you talk about taking that photograph? Or?
It was taken, I think, in Henry Street near Christmas, and he was perfect. His clothes, his coat, his tie, his hair were perfectly groomed, and he just had this funny big jaw going out to the side. That is, we were told what that affliction it comes from. But he didn't see me, and I was very close to him because, in those kind of street photographs, one has to become as invisible, and it's not easy to become invisible because, particularly with the camera, the minute you do something like make a movement, I couldn't have gone this close to people in the country as I did in Dublin. But you kind of train yourself to be less visible. There's no magic technique. Yeah. I used to think of doing things like dressing up as a clown, because nobody pay any attention to you then. You'd just be some clown.
Yes.
And maybe if you did dress up, you would have actually a better chance of being avoided.
Yes.
But to move in close to within like this distance, 8, 12 inches, 15 inches, without being noticed, it's just. Sometimes you're lucky and sometimes you're not, but it's always an anxiety-riven moment taking a photograph. My toes are scrunching up in my shoes. I don't know what's going to happen. I missed the photograph. I got the wrong exposure. I need to move back more. There's something in the way. You spend your time moving your head around in situations, recomposing what you're looking at. So I'm avoiding seeing the fire alarm thing on the door over there, so I'm always moving my head away while I'm looking at you now. So
because
you develop instinctive movements.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's it. Some people can move very close, others have to stay back. And most times you'd say that photographers, if they take a lot of landscape pictures, or they like the country and don't like people, it's only because they're more nervous or more anxiety-ridden and don't want to face the people. But the actual really interesting things are, of course, the people. And what you see in the people, because it could be just blank, just another face.
Because I was conscious of there's a photo of the man with the bike and the woman with the white stiletto shoes, and they both are looking very suspicious, and there was sort of the comments were about, who said he owns the bike anyway. And, I suppose, so they're looking at you full on in the eye. And
not happy.
Hostile, yes. And
they're window shopping for whiskey.
Yes,
they're actually about to steal your camera. They're not looking at the whiskey. But, they didn't look Irish. They looked, they might be foreign. I thought they were foreigners. But I thought maybe they were Roma and or Gypsy, not Irish.
Yes.
Unless they're because he looks very dark. But among travellers, people who are very dark are called gommers, which mean yellow.
Okay.
They're yellow skin. Maybe they have some gypsy blood, or maybe they're from Galway, and that's when they're going back to the Armada.
Yes.
You know, there are a lot of people with dark hair, black hair, and sallow
absolutely.
complexions in the West.
Yes. Yeah.
So
yeah.
put it down to that.
Yeah. And I was amused at I actually laughed out loud when I was reading it again this morning, the photograph of the two women passing the undertakers, and one of them is smiling at you, and one of the comments is, "Ha ha, she just left the husband there." And it was just so funny, but like that, she was obviously, and again that was identified by the comment, and that's why the way it's designed, the way, as I said, it's like you're hearing voices, you know, the voices speak. Yeah. And actually that was another thing that in terms of the comments, people saying about the sense of the smell of the city, the smog, the music, that somebody actually commented and said, I wish there was sound to this, which is such a tribute to your, you know, the evocative nature of your photography. And, you know, I suppose like that sense of nostalgia. I mean, how do you feel coming back to the city? I know you come back to Ireland regularly and to Dublin regularly, but when you saw your photos around the city, for instance, that brilliant photograph of the coal man, that was, you know, it was on the Digivan. Yeah, on O'Connell Street. Well, you wander around the city.
Yeah, but it's kind of different, you know. I was young, and he was my landlord, and I lived in his flat that had, you know, a cold water tap, gas light, and a toilet in the garden. Outside. I can't even remember where it was, somewhere around where the Daisy Market used to be. In the back, I can't remember exactly the area.
Yes.
Yeah, I wouldn't know how to begin to do these. I wouldn't, you know, these are another world of photographs than what I do now.
Yes.
I don't know how to actually proceed. You'd have to ask me something else.
Yes.
If I can answer your question, we came from Verona. We came to the city, and the bus stop had the photos, and we were very excited. With Neil, we look around, and we from bus stop to bus stop, DigiPanel, and we actually took photos of most of them. I think whatever we could find. So that was really I think the connection of Alen with the city, you know, that's really established it. The belonging.
Yeah. And you, I mean, in terms of your other bodies of work, I mean, you have an extensive oeuvre and portfolio of works that can be viewed on your website. I suppose you do photograph groups of people or particular locations, but obviously the bond is stronger, I suppose, with Ireland. But do you translate anything from, you know, the experience of these photographs from 1963, much earlier in your career, to your work later in your career?
Right. Yeah. Well, the other, you know, I did a series on the subways in New York, which is much more based on art photography in a way, because I've put two images together in a way that is provocative, that it looks like one, but it's not one, it's two. In most cases, not all, and that hasn't been published yet. We did them in the photographs in 1977, so I'm really slow getting things done. And now time is actually running out.
Although you have published quite extensively. I mean, you've a number. I mean, for instance, the traveller photographs have been widely exhibited, haven't they? And
they have. Yes, they've been around quite a lot.
Published. I mean, because they are. I mean, they are very iconic images.
I don't know how I would do in trying to take photographs in Dublin again, because you can't sort of go back over the same territory. It's different. When you you change, and you don't want to go back and do the same kind of photographs.
Yes.
So I'd have to find another avenue that I could find myself in.
Yes.
To do,
Yeah.
to try.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're very pleased, I'm sure, with the reaction. I mean, the book, and you were featured on RT News today, and I mean, there has been a great response.
We're thrilled with the book. We think it looks really good.
Yeah.
And it's not always I think that about things I do, but I think it did really well. But Pesya is the architect of the book.
Yes.
It wouldn't have
Yeah.
happened. Definitely
Yeah,
wouldn't have
which
happened
is-
if I would never have thought of posting a photograph online.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think
It's,
I mean,
it's her imagination.
It is a great tribute to you, Pesya, for the genesis of the idea and the impetus for posting the photos and then the engagement. Because I mean, to get 72,000 responses and then to edit out what appears in the book was no mean feat. And especially since you had never visited the city, it's even more remarkable. So so I mean, I just urge everybody to get their copy of the book. It really is absolutely wonderful. Congratulations! I've shown this copy to a few people already, and the response has just been terrific.
Oh,
So,
thank you.
would anybody like to ask any questions from the floor?
I have a question about your archive, because I think actually your work is really timeless and it's quite surreal, you know, and there's a certain abstraction to it which is really compelling. So I'm just wondering, you were talking, it's really interesting what you're saying about, you know, art is made, you know, through this, you make good art when things feel awkward. But I'm wondering, how often do you go back to your archive and revisit it? Because what you might think was not a great picture when you made it, you're going to think differently about your work now.
Absolutely, yeah.
Changes. So I wonder, do you do that?
That's true, I do, but I've only been doing it recently as the archive is going to University College Cork. So I wanted to have some record of it and anything I wanted to revisit to do, like a group of photographs in Mexico that I did in 1964. So I look at them again, and I see sometimes I'll see things that I didn't see before, and I wonder, how on earth did I not see that? What an idiot I'm doing about this and that. And anyway, you change your mind lots and lots of times. And time is the one thing that photographs improve in time.
Yeah.
When I took these, I would have said maybe there were about 10, 15 that I like. And I printed those, and the rest didn't get printed. But when the archive is about to go to Cork, I thought I better get a move on and just make sure I have it. So I started printing, and then I thought, well, actually they're good.
Yeah.
And then institutions started buying them, and their purchasing paid for publishing the book.
Yes. Yeah. Well,
So
that's great.
it's actually a book of total freedom on my side, just to be allowed to choose how everything will look on print and which pictures and which the sequence. And the designer we worked with was very sensitive to our requirements or what we thought would be the best way to do it. There's a lot of decisions about whether the book should be a little more square, a little more vertical, how do you accommodate the only reason that there are fold-out pages really is that there were too many comments, and we couldn't cope with the comments, or the fold-out pages broke the monotony of having one picture and a commentary on another page, one picture and a commentary on another page. So putting them in a fold-out, you could accommodate lots of comments, but it became very complicated once you folded back, that this had to also have comments, and this had to have comment, this had to have a picture. So it was a juggling procedure that went on for quite a long time.
Yeah.
But we did manage to get it done in this year,
Yes.
which is that's the driving purpose of it.
Yeah.
It came out of the pandemic, and it's labelled pandemic. It should be. We had a lot of discussion about the title.
Yeah.
Pesya got a title, The Pandemic Mirror, as looking back. That's kind of abstract, too complicated. So I think Anthony Farrell, the publisher, came up with this simple title. But it's a terrible error in the beginning of the book, which attributes the comments to me, not Dublin or the Dubliners.
Okay,
There.
yes.
So that was like number one. That's a really bad mistake.
Maybe you got the comments as a present from Dublin.
I'm sure maybe there might be a second edition anyway, but I'm sure the book will be very popular.
Yeah.
Maybe it'll be reprinted.
Well, we can correct things.
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
There is, yeah.
Also, I mean, just the image behind you there, I just noticed as well with the man and the lady there with the dog. It was interesting as well in terms of the comments, the number of people who referenced James Joyce in
Yes.
particular, the dead.
Yes.
And I thought that was, that image and where that is, it was identified. It certainly looks like Fitzwilliam Square.
It is Fitzwilliam Square for sure.
But it's.
And that's my ex-wife.
Oh really? Okay.
And she is walking the dog, even though somebody has said it doesn't look he's a guy just pretending to be a dog walker.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
That he was looking at her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what lurks in the minds of people is
Exactly.
an unknown.
Well, that was the thing about the comments. I mean, talk about going off on complete tangents with
Yeah.
people, and also the clothing that people
Yeah,
wear and the hats, whether somebody was a priest or whether they weren't,
right.
seemed to be
Yeah.
a kind of an issue for debate. So, Pesya, what is your impression of Dublin now on your first visit?
Yeah, it's my second one.
Second visit.
Yeah.
In terms of the looking at these photographs, it's.
I think I came here already with a map of Dublin.
Yes.
Because every time that somebody mentioned the place, I looked at the map and to see where it is. So
Yeah.
I had something, before I came.
Yes.
And it's a very interesting, visually the city, as an artist I can say it's a very interesting city.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm sure we will be back soon.
Would anybody else like to?
Could photography has kind of, in some ways, thrived during the pandemic because we've all lived on our screens. I'm wondering, are you going to continue this dialogue on social media with your other bodies?
With other photographs? No,
No, okay.
no.
No.
Well, this came from this one. This pandemic, nobody knew what it was. All of our heads were in cardboard boxes waiting for, not knowing what to do. We sprayed everything we bought in the store. We ordered online. Pesya went down to the store and picked it up. And you just took what they had. The shops were half empty. They just gave you what they had. So it's very much tied to our predicament of last year and this year, and the unknown. So that is, I think, perhaps more important than anything else about the book, that it is a product of that.
Yeah, well, it's one positive thing that came out of, as you say, the predicament that people had the time to look and think, and people were in nostalgic and reflective mode because of the trauma, collective trauma that everybody was undergoing worldwide. So I think, it is lovely to have something positive at this stage. And as I said, many congratulations to you, Alan, and many congratulations, Pesya, as well.
Thank you to our audience for coming out tonight, and thank you to our audience who have joined us online. I asked the camera, always the camera. So the books are available for sale downstairs, so if you haven't already got a copy, Alan is available. Thank you again.